Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Rabbi zidni ilma. Allahumma inni as'aluka ilman nafi'a. So today we will talk about the scientific method, what it is, how it was invented by the Muslims, and how it was misunderstood in the West to this day. And it's something really very simple. And so instead of running ahead, let me just go step by step. So in the classical theory of supply and demand, there are two axioms: that the labor has diminishing marginal productivity in firms, so they keep hiring labor until the marginal product becomes equal to the wage, and that's what determines the demand for labor by the firms. And the supply of labor is determined by the firms, because as the laborers work more and more, they have increasing marginal disutility of labor, and so ultimately they equalize the real wage to the disutility of labor, and so that's where the supply and demand equilibrium arises. So this is the standard. This was theory before Keynes. This theory was rejected by Keynes, and now this is now today's theory. So there is a mystery here. How come Keynes rejected it, and then how come it was brought back in? So what is the evidence against the classical theory? For the first time, Keynes opened his eyes and looked at the world. This is something economists don't do, and you have not been trained to do, and that's what I will try to teach you how to do. So he looked at the world and he says that, look, there is unemployment all around, and it is not going away. What should happen was that the real wage should go down, and the excess supply should be eliminated, but it doesn't happen. And then he said another thing, that he noticed actually in the real world that there was a wage cut in the, I think, railways in industry in England, and all the laborers went on strike, and it was a big problem. He said so if the nominal wage reduces, then the laborers don't want it. But if the inflation occurs with the same 10% reduction in nominal wage, laborers will not allow it. But if the 10% inflation, there was no strike. So obviously the real world tells us that the negotiation between labor and firm is not about real wage. That is what he said, it's about nominal wage. Now this is a very radical statement, because if you have wage negotiations about nominal wage, then automatically money matters. And this is one of the key things in Keynes, that money is not neutral, because if you see you have nominal wage is one thing and price is the other thing, and the two move independently, then the level of money will make a difference. If the money only is proportional to price, then money doesn't matter, and this is what you have been taught, that money is neutral, money is doesn't matter, and so quantity theory of money is false in the labor market. Also, utility maximization by laborers is false. So actually, what Keynes discovered is actually cutting at the root of microeconomic theory. Yes? No. Real wage is not sticky. Keynes does not say real wage is sticky. So Keynes theory is very dangerous. He says that laborers do not maximize utility. Money enters into an essential way in the economy, and that real wage is an emergent property. Today's lecture is more or less about the emergent property. What does it mean? Basically what he says is that the real wage is determined by the system as a whole. It is not up to the individual actors within the system to determine the real wage. And this is again something entirely different from the standard theory. So what does it mean? I just give one very simple example to explain what it means for emergent property. Then we will give more complicated examples, because this is a very important issue. So suppose that we have a single good economy. Laborers produce the good. There is only one input, and suppose that the price is the marginal cost, and everything is constant cost. And suppose that the firms do either marginal cost pricing or markup pricing. Take the wage and multiply it by some constant. So now the wages, the laborers and the firms decide on a wage. Automatically that sets the price, and the price of the consumer good is the price index. So the real wage is automatically fixed outside the control of, no matter how the laborers and the firms set the nominal wage, the real wage will be automatically fixed. So this is just an example, an illustration. This is not a real case, but actually this is what Keynes is saying, that the firms and the laborers can decide about the nominal wage, but they cannot decide about the real wage. That's determined by the system. So the real wage may not behave in the way that you want it to, that okay, let the real wage go down so that the laborers' supply declines. So, in complex systems, flocking behavior is an emergent property. क्या question है?
सर आप कह रहे हैं जैसे रियल वेज जो है वो मतलब डिपेंड नहीं करते, सिस्टम पे डिपेंड करता है, लेकिन फर्म्स और लेबर नहीं कर सकते. लेकिन जब गवर्नमेंट हर साल कॉम्पेंसेट कर रही होती है, लेट्स सपोज कि हमें 10% इन्फ्लेशन आई है तो वेजेस इंक्रीज कर हो जाती है 10%, तो उसको हम कैसे अकोमोडेट कर सकते हैं?
That's also an emergent property, and it's not in control of the laborers and the firms. If the government does something, it's not in control of the. That's all that. You see, the equilibrium in the market between firms and laborers does not determine the real wage. That's the main thing. Now, I'm not going to cover the net logo model, but I would like Nadia to arrange a separate session to demonstrate the net logo model of flocking behavior, which I will discuss. But I won't go into the inner details, but I would like you to learn the inner details by separately arranging a session. So here is, how does this run? This is the video of a flocking behavior. These are birds, and ये लोड नहीं किया है वीडियो. I think it's now going to show us the video. I see it moved to the next slide. I wonder if I can. All right, so I wish I could show this. So you know that. Oh God! I don't want this computer scan. It's going to slow things down. एक चीज़ें करता जा रहा खुद से.
Basically, what you're saying is that real wage is not determined. Laborers and firms they have no ability to affect the wage.
Exactly.
So, between negotiation only in real income within the labor market to nominal wage. That's what Keynes.
Yes, the Keynes said that. Now you see we are seeing a behavior of these birds. Now these birds are moving in a pattern. Now this is a puzzle. How can all of these birds move together in a coordinated way? Do they have any wireless systems? How are they communicating? How are these patterns forming? How do they know? I mean, who's controlling this? What is the way in which this is a big puzzle which puzzled people for many. Okay, now the next slide is this one. So that was the real world. Now we have a simulation model of this. ये क्या हो गया? अच्छा, why is this? There is no video, no sound. This is a simulation model. This is the net logo model, which but this is not the one that I wanted to, because the one I had was it is in my slides, but for some reason it's not playing. Yeah, I think this is the one. Okay. This is not the one that I have. This is a 3D simulation. Alright. So, I think basically this is a computer generated model which is based on very simple rules of behavior. क्या हुआ? फर्स्ट मेरे लेक्चर में वो तो मैंने दिखा दिया, दूसरा एक वीडियो था. अच्छा ये वाला, हाँ, this is the one, exactly. सही है.
So here's my implementation of the Boyd's flocking simulation, which many people have done over the years. So there's one Boyd, and it's sort of moving randomly, and it's avoiding some obstacles, but
this
what
is
gets really interesting is when we put it all together,
you put down a bird and
they behave like a flock randomly. Of birds or fish or whatever you want. And they do this with a couple of different rules that when combined together in a group, you get this really interesting sort of emergent behavior. I can use a buzzword.
Emergent behavior.
They break up and reform and do all these interesting things just based on those rules.
There are just 3 rules that the birds follow. And from those 3 rules,
so the first rule
complex
here is,
behavior.
Alignment.
First rule is alignment.
I'll just put a bunch of guys out here for fun. So what each Boyd does is it looks to its neighbors, its friends, in kind of a small radius, maybe about 2 or 3 body lengths, as long as they are now. And it averages the position of all of its friends' headings, right, the direction that they're facing. And it moves a little bit towards that direction. So if all of its friends are looking to the left, it turns a little bit towards the left. And every Boyd does that for every other Boyd that's in that little radius of its friends group.
It looks around, and if it
so
moves
if I turn that
together
off,
with
you'll
the
see they just kind of go everywhere. They don't really have a reason to go in any one direction or another. Now there's some other rules. Obviously you can see they like to be near each other. And that's the second rule. There's a cohesion rule. They take that same grouping, that same radius around themselves of friends, and average their positions. They say, okay, for all the Boyds around me, roughly where's the center of all of them, and they seek towards that a little bit. So there's also a balancing force against that. If they get too close to all the other Boyds that are near them, they back away, they avoid crowding. So you can see these look pretty realistic to maybe little fish swimming around. They like to be near each other, but not so near. But because they don't care about what direction they're facing right now, since I've turned off alignment,
rule is
they just kind of float around. And as soon as I turn that back on,
alignment is now on.
Suddenly it looks like they have a purpose. They're swimming fast, you know. And you see that group just reformed with another group. So those are the 3 rules, and I can turn these these things off at will here. If we turn off crowding rule, they'll get really close
crowding
together.
rule
They
in
want to be
an
near each other, and they
So
want to
now,
pop each other's headings. So they formed into just
crowding
one.
rule says, okay,
Turn
don't
it
get
back
too
on,
close.
they'll pop back out.
So now they
And there's some other stuff going on here. They have, you know, they have some noise. If I turn off the noise, they're pretty smooth. And if I turn it back on, you can see them kind of jiggle.
Alright, so now very important, because something that no economist understands currently, that there are models and there is reality. We just saw both of them. One, there was a reality, there were birds flying in the air, and then there's a net logo model. These two are not the same. Strangely enough, economists don't understand this. They think that the net logo model is the same as the birds. So if I create a model of a consumer who has utility management, this is not the same as a real human being. Unfortunately, economists don't understand the difference. So actually, Ibnul Haytham gave the principles for science. And on the... Oh, I should put in F5. Huh? Yes. Okay. So, in the left panel is the Wikipedia summary of what he saw, of Ibnul Haytham's principles. On the right side, I have explained it in Islamic terms, which is how actually Ibnul Haytham saw it. So, the first principle is observation. This is missing from the economist's world. Observation means we look at the world around us, because this is what Allah Ta'ala orders us to do. He says that look at the world around you. So, we look at this complex world, and then we look for the ayatullah, the signs. I mean, this world is complex, but there are signs. So what are these signs? We look for them. So that's what he calls the statement of the problem. Actually, it means that you should look for an interesting pattern that you see. This pattern can be a regression model, for example. Then a formulation of hypothesis is what they call it, but this is not what it is. It's actually, why is this pattern there? You think about the hidden causes. What is behind the surface reality which leads to the emergence of this pattern? So we look at these birds and we ask, how can these birds move along in such a coordinated fashion? So this is not there in the surface. This is not there in the data, not there in the observation. You have to think about it, and that's exactly the unseen. That this is what the whole of all of Islam is about, that you look at the seen in order to get to the unseen reality behind it. So, testing of hypothesis. Now you construct your model, that you believe that such and such is true, and then you test it against reality, that okay, and now I want to check for the match between my net logo model, which is based on some simple rules, and the reality. So we compare the model results with the real world, and if there is a match, we are happy. If there is a mismatch, then we try to understand why there is a mismatch, and we fix the model. And so we use the results of the test to arrive at conclusions. This is interpretation of data and formulation in Wikipedia. What it means is that if you have a good match, then you are satisfied. If you have a mismatch, then you worry about tinkering with the model to make it better, to get a better match between observations. Now you have in your economics, you have never, so if we were to apply this to economic theory, we would say that okay, if I want to study consumer behavior, I should go and get a lot of data on how consumers behave. After I get this data, then I should look at what are the patterns, and then I should create a theory about consumer behavior. Now all of this is missing. You never study ever a consumer behavior. Similarly, if I want to study how firms behave, then I should go and look at firms and see what they do. You have never seen. If I want to study international trade, I should look at what Pakistan is trading with India. You have studied international trade course, and you have never studied these. Why? Because they don't understand science, economists. Now, Ibnul Haytham's model of the motions of each of the 7 planets. This is the title of the book. He is using modeling, and he also explains the theory of modeling. And he says that model is not the same as reality. And he develops a principle of modeling which is called in the Western literature Occam's razor. But he develops this principle. He says that when we want to create a model, we want to create the simplest possible model, because reality is complex. I want to explain it using the simplest possible principles that I can possibly do. So he employs minimal hypotheses regarding the properties that characterize astronomical motions, and he eliminates unobservables, complexities. So basically it's a Ibnul Haytham describes an early version. This is just injustice. I mean, he developed a principle which was more sophisticated than what they could understand. Now, what does the Wikipedia say about this, about Occam's razor? Although the principle bears his name, William of Ockham did not invent it. This concept is found in writings of many others like Duns Scotus, Thomas Aquinas, Durand St. Pourçain, and has roots back as Aristotle. What happened to the middle? The Aristotle is Greek, and then these are 18th, 17th century. So there is a gap of 1,000 years. Nobody thought anything about science during these 1,000 years. Now there's another article by William Thorburn, and he says in the middle of the 19th century onward, everyone quotes William of Ockham and says that this is what he said and this is the principle, but there is these are not found in his writings. So he concludes in his article that Occam's razor is a modern myth and the principle was not known to Occam. Now, Schumpeter is a name you might be familiar with. He's a famous historian of economics, and if you ever study history of economic thought, then Schumpeter is referred to. So he says that there is a great gap in economic thinking of mankind. First, the Greeks had economics, and then in the Middle Ages, the Europeans started, and then for 1,000 years, mankind didn't think about economics. So it turns out that there is a huge amount of course, Islamic writings, and lots of people have written about Islamic economic thought. Now it turns out that the Western tradition on free market and commerce described by Adam Smith repeats almost verbatim, yani this is plagiarism, the works of Islamic Persian scholars like Nasiruddin at-Tusi, al-Ghazali, and Smith had Latin translations of these books in his library. So it's not that he reinvented these. And this has been documented by many. So Adam Smith was just a plagiarist. He copied from. But according to Schumpeter, according to what the West teaches you, he was the father of modern economics. So there is this great gap invented by the West of how for 1,000 years, and the Greeks had thoughts, and then for 1,000 years people stopped thinking, and then again in Europe they started thinking in the Enlightenment. Now, Ibnul Haytham was actually the one who invented the scientific method, although the West claims that they are the exclusive. Yani Max Weber, sociologist, intelligent, learned man, says that Europeans are uniquely capable of science. Other black people can't even think about science. So, but what the historian says that according to majority of his, Al-Haytham was the pioneer of the modern scientific method. With his book, he changed the meaning of the term optics and established experiments as the norm of proof in the field. Basically, as I told you earlier in one of my other lectures, all of optics was based on this axiomatic method. Axiomatic method of the Greeks is precisely this idea that you sit in your room and you think about the world and you come to conclusions by logic without ever looking at the world. Actually, Aristotle discouraged experiments and observations for reasons that I have explained elsewhere. I mean, there is some logic to what he thought, but it just happens not to work. So, Ibnul Haytham was the first one who said that let's do some real world observation in order to find out about optics. And he came to, and he basically invented the field of optics. And many theorems, principles of optics are named for like Fermat and other people, which were invented by him. as usual, the great gap. Now, this is the greatest discovery that I made while I was searching. I was totally amazed. Literally, my jaw dropped to the floor. This is written in New World Encyclopedia. It's not in some obscure book somewhere, some Arab writer or some mullah saying in his that. Ibnul Haytham was one of the greatest physicists of all time. He anticipated Fermat's principle of least times. This is really amazing. We are talking, he invented the principle. It is now named after Fermat. Instead of saying that this is a plagiarism, it should be attributed to him, they are saying Fermat's principle, but he thought of it first. How strange. He enunciated the law of inertia, later to become Newton's first law of motion. Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi rajiun. This is, I'm just flabbergasted. What can I say? You can't just say this. He created the law of inertia. I didn't know this. I have, all my life I have been taught that there are Newton's 3 laws of motions, and Newton was the greatest scientist in all of mankind because he invented these 3 laws of motion. Now you are telling us that Ibnul Haytham discovered this law, but it is still Newton's law. Ibnul Haytham also discovered the concept of momentum. This was written in different places, so I had to pick it up from 3 different places, and that's why I was totally baffled. So Newton's second law, also discovered by Ibnul Haytham, and around the same time as Abu Ali Sina. So other people also discovered it. Finally, the third law of motion is also due to Ibnul Haytham, the principle of gravity and gravitational attraction at long distances. So, this is in 11th century, and all of these books of the Arabs, these are famous people, and they were known, and their books were translated. It's not that these were somehow forgotten and then they rediscovered this. They were actually taking them directly from our sources. So Newton was not. And now this interesting thing is that people like Henry Kissinger and others say that, it's obvious that Europeans are superior to the rest of the world because they had Newton and they had Copernicus, and nobody else had Newton and Copernicus. But we had our Newton in 11th century. Yes, that's true. That was a major setback. The libraries were destroyed, Baghdad.
The knowledge which has created at that time was much greater than the existing knowledge of today.
Yes, that's true. So now we are told that Newton and Leibniz invented calculus. But this is again taken from the same encyclopedia. Ibnul Haytham discovered the earliest formula for the sum of fourth powers. He discovered mathematical induction, again attributed to somebody else. He developed the method for general formula of sum of integral powers. This was fundamental to the development of infinitesimal calculus and integral calculus, differentiation and integration, both invented by Ibnul Haytham. In mathematics, he goes on to systematize infinitesimal calculus, building on works of others, conic sections, and analytic geometry. So, scientific method, calculus, Newton's 3 laws, and Copernicus revolution, all invented by Muslims, all claimed by Europeans, and with the knowledge that this has been invented by Muslims. So this is what is called theft. Chori or upar se sina zori. So now, despite all of this, the Europeans still do not understand what the scientific method is, because of the fact that basically what scientific method is about looking at the world to deduce the creation, the nature, looking at the creation to deduce the properties of the creator of the universe. And now they don't want to admit this. They don't want to admit this. And this refusal, obstinate refusal to acknowledge God, is the reason for their failure to understand science. To this day, they do not understand what science is. So here is a quote from Rational Wiki. each hypothesis must be able to predict some final state. This is the idea that science is about prediction, which is a false idea, which you are taught in econometrics, that econometric models should be evaluated by forecasting and by fit and some other things. But none of this is true. Actually, the econometric model should be evaluated by, you see, again, econometrics failure, again for the same reason. Suppose I want to study the impact of FDI on growth. Then first thing I need to do is to look at what is happening in the real world. Who is investing? Where is the FDI? Is it McDonald's coming in? Is it some Chinese companies coming in? You have to go and look at the real world, look at the real birds. Then you create the model. But in economic theory as well as in econometrics, you cut out this step. No connection with the real world. So once then you build the model, then you check it against reality. Again, you have to go into the real world. But both of these steps are missing, and that's why econometrics is completely bogus. And everybody can understand that it is bogus. I mean, you pick up some numbers from some tables and another numbers from tables, and you hope to learn about the real world? Come on. You can't do that. But this is unfortunately the mistraining of all the students. I mean, every economic thesis you pick up, they run some regression and come to some conclusions, which is all bogus, because they never looked at the real world in the first place, and then they didn't match their conclusions, so they didn't follow the scientific method as discovered by Ibnul Haytham and as misunderstood by the West. So here what he is saying that prediction is the goal of science. Prediction is not the goal of science. Forecasting is not the goal of science. The goal of modeling is to produce a match to reality, to try to understand the hidden reality behind the observation. So the data is actually the observation, the pattern and now the goal is to get underneath, to find out the hidden causes. Because once you reduce it to prediction, forecasting, then you get to these things. And actually this is God did it, so that is not scientific automatically. So if you get to anything underneath, that is not scientific, so you shouldn't even consider it. It's a very interesting, famous example of how obstinate these people are. Hume, David Hume, who was actually the father of the atheist in some sense, he has one chapter on how empirical evidence is very important, and if a lot of people testify to something, then you must believe it, even if it is very hard, even if you cannot understand how it happened. But if you have a lot of strong empirical evidence, then you must believe it. In separate chapter 18 on miracles, he says that if everybody testifies in the world that they saw the moon split apart, because then you must refuse it, because miracles can't happen. So the exact opposite. So lots of people have written about how this is a contradiction in Hume's and so on. So on the one hand, it's acceptable if it's not a miracle, but if it's a miracle, then you can reject empirical evidence. So actually, nowadays, behavioral economists have started to look at the real world behavior of human beings, and they have found many things, many interesting things which are not part of economic theory. One of Thaler has written about models of mental accounting. He says that according to economic theory, we have one income, but actually human beings don't have one income. If they earn some money as a prize, they treat it in a different way. So he starts his chapter by saying that two people earned earned $1,000 as a prize for a lottery, so they took a trip to Bahamas. But they actually had $1,000 sitting in their bank, but they didn't use that because they have separate compartments for this. So if it was utility maximization, then the overall income determines, but this is not how people behave. And then there is the lure of the free. If you offer somebody something free, he cannot refuse it. So just recently we were discussing about in the planning commission about how these foreign donors come in with saying that okay, we will finance this, and people just take the project not understanding that there is a great harm in accepting this project because so much free money, millions of dollars are coming in free, so we must take it. Halanki, it might actually cause a lot of harm, like this polio drops, which is being given free. It's we are basically killing our children for the profits of the multinationals. Not nobody says that you should take polio drops. Polio drops are contraindicated for people who are malnourished because they have low resistance. Now half of our population of children are malnourished, and again you cannot repeat the dose. Nowhere in the world, not even guinea pigs have been given repeated dose at 6 months because the vaccine doesn't go out of the system. If it's healthy, then if you follow standard international practice, that's fine. But if you don't, it's the what is being practiced here is far beyond any recommendations of any medical doctor. So, there was this Greek method which was invented by Aristotle, and now these people, the West, wants to attribute, if they cannot find, because you see, there are later people like Descartes and Occam, etc. These were not inventors; they were just copyists. So very often the fiction that the idea was originated by these later European imitators like Copernicus, etc., cannot be sustained because the idea can be found before. So then they say, okay, if we can't find it before, then we put it back on the head of the Greeks. So because there is this great gap, nobody is allowed to think in these 1,000 years. So you can't have a Muslim originator. So the Occam principle, which is that you should try to find simple models, is given back to Aristotle. But they write. So this is the statement they use to show that Aristotle invented Occam's principle, even though he did not. But the next sentence is Aristotle went too far in believing that experiment and observation were unnecessary. So it's clear that Aristotle could not have invented the scientific method. The strange thing is, you see, because of their obstinacy, because of their refusal to understand what the Muslims did, they themselves get trapped by, so they are following the same. The economists are following the Greek method. So I have an article which is Economists Confuse Greek Methodology with Science, and they think that this is the scientific method, even though it's not. It's the Greek method. Greek method is to sit in your room and think about the axioms and then learn about the world, never looking at the real world. So Aristotle thought, and he came up with the conclusion that the heavy stone must fall faster than the light stone. He never went up to a mountaintop to drop 2 stones to check, because this is not his method. So the same thing that then the models are confused with the reality. That I have developed this perfect theory and it must be true. This is what Krugman said, that the profession as a whole went astray because they confused the beauty of mathematics with truth. Now exactly this same problem occurred with Ptolemy. Ptolemy thought that circles were perfect. They are a perfection. And so he said that the planets must follow circles. And so when they didn't, then they said, okay, we make circles upon circles. These are epicycles. But you can't go outside of the circles. So Ibnul Haytham says that he is imagining this motion in his mind, but his imagination doesn't force the planets to follow that trajectory. So, for a man to imagine a circle in the heavens and to imagine a planet moving in it does not bring about the planet's motion. The planet moves regardless. So, models are separate from reality. This is what Ptolemy is saying. And the same problem that he is saying that occurred with Ptolemy is the same problem today with the economists. Economists don't understand that their thinking that consumers maximize utility forces the consumers to maximize utility or not. Consumers behave independently of what the economists think. Now, I wanted to show this. Again, I think I have to minimize this. अच्छा, वो कहाँ पे है जो मैं अभी दिखलाना चाह रहा हूँ? It doesn't come. Alright, so I'll search for it. Greatest bird show on earth. This is one. Two different flocks. Tabarakallah ahsanul khaliqeen. This is what you're supposed to say when you look at this. This is how you look at the mystery and the wonder and the beauty of the creation of God. This is what science is about, not what. Look at how beautiful this is, how amazing. What is happening here? How did this? There are two different flocks, but they fly through each other. So this is reality. Look at the reality, and then you try to understand how this reality works. क्या हुआ? Rules. अभी आ रहा है. We are looking at the rules. Okay, I'm going to stop this here. Okay, so how do you? Oh, I think you go into the slideshow and you say from current slide. Yes. So there are three rules of bird behavior. So these rules are not in the reality. This is what you have to think. This is the model, and so the three rules are alignment, cohesion, and separation. So alignment is basically that the bird changes the direction of its flight to match those in a local radius. So you look nearby and you look at the direction in which the birds are flying, and you say, okay, I'll adjust my direction of motion to match the locals. And then cohesion. So you look at the center of mass of a group of birds and you try to move nearer to the center. And separation, you try to avoid collisions basically. So these two are opposite forces. The cohesion force is trying to pull the birds together, and the separation keeps them apart. So that's why there is some distance between the birds, but they fly together. And we saw in the model that if you take out the separation, then they all become concentrated on one spot. So now this is an article in 2010 or something, very recently. These are some pictures of starlings which we just saw movies of. So they are showing how the flocks behave. So accurate modeling has not been possible until now. This is what the article says. Because we have been able to get high-speed photographs, three-dimensional, which is very accurate description of what actually the flocks do. So in the model, you have certain things like the speed and the movement, and certain newly identified factors, which are the bird's attraction to its roost. So the bird is trying to get back to its home also. This is something not easily available. But at the same time, it's coordinating with other birds. And simplified physics of aerodynamic flight, which includes banking while turning. But how was this possible? There are first 3D recordings using stereo photography of real starlings, which were published only last year. So now that it is done, it is possible to create a model by looking at what is happening and trying to find out the rules which will create this behavior, and then matching the model to reality. Now this is something which is completely unknown to economists. They have no concept of matching models to reality. And that's why all of this stuff being taught is garbage, because they don't ever match these models to reality. So that's why we have a great opportunity in front of us, because all of this thing is there. Yani, the reality is there, the history is there, the data is there. We can study it correctly. So we can study reality and we can do science on it, and we can create a new science of economics. And everybody understands that all over the world the need for a new economics is clear. Nobody knows how to do it, because they are stuck in this trap of this misunderstanding of science. They don't know what science is, so they can't, they know that there's something wrong, but they don't know how to fix it. Now the thing is that all human beings, it's not that the West is always stupid. Keynes was very smart, and there have been many smart people. And so he used the scientific method. He actually observed unemployment, and he said, okay, this conflicts with the model, so what should we do? We should change the model, not rationalize the observations. Model must be true. This is the economics attitude. Model must be true. Observations have to be explained away. This is the standard. So if there is unemployment, it's due to friction. It's due to this, that, and the other, but not the idea that we should change the model. This never occurs. So Keynes' new model has some features which are, as we discussed, very strange for conventional economics, because Keynes says that laborers do not maximize utility, the disutility of labor is not set equal to the real wage. He explicitly rejects that. And so since the negotiation is nominal wage, that means that money matters in a real way, and he says that explicitly, that money is not neutral. So in particular, if you have if you have massive unemployment, if you increase the supply of money in the economy, that will help. Now, according to conventional theory, and this makes perfect sense. If you just use your intuition, think about the real world instead of sitting in a room and thinking about axioms, then you will see that it must be the case that if the money is in scarce supply and you increase it, then everybody will be helped out, and the laborer will be, unemployment will decrease. This is what Keynes said. No, Pakistan has a different economy, different type of economy. But there are some insights which can be borrowed. So there were three features of his theory, all of which are, you see, the observation is that there is involuntary and prolonged unemployment. So now, this is what we see in the real world, a complex pattern. Now we come back to our room and we think, what is a model which can create this phenomena? So Keynes thought about this, and he made a model, the Keynesian model, which has three features, which is that real wage is an emergent property, money enters in an essential way, and laborers do not maximize utility. All three of these principles have been rejected. The modern macroeconomics does not have any of these three principles. And that's why it is wrong, because it conflicts with the observation. Now, the interesting thing is that the attack on Keynes was made that Keynes does not have micro foundations. This attack was made in 1970s and 80s by Lucas and his Chicago school students. And basically, what they are saying is that micro foundation means that Keynes does not satisfy the axioms. Well, obviously, Keynes rejected the axioms because they did not match the observations, but Now they say no, axioms have to be protected regardless of what the observations are. And so, going back to the Greek method, that the axioms must be true regardless of what the reality is. So, the first step in the scientific method is to learn about the real world. Now, in your economics courses, this never happens. You never learn. There's a whole 20th century in which huge numbers of economic events happened. There was the Great Depression, there was the savings and loan crisis, there was the colonial economies which became independent. So what was happening in Pakistan before the independence, and how did the economy change after the independence? What happened to the exports of Pakistan before Bangladesh, and what happened after Bangladesh? These are all the things the first thing that you need to learn about in order to formulate the theory. And you never learn about these things. And then you are told that you have an economist. So, if you want to be an economist, you have to change, and you have to learn economic events, you have to learn history, and you have to study these on your own, because these are not part of your syllabus, because we are just blindly copying the West. There is this book by Jeffrey Hodgson about how economics forgot history. It is not that this has always been the way. In the 1890s, there was a battle of methodologies as this new idea about science was coming up, and the idea that science should be mathematical and quantitative and it should follow laws. And there was the standard school of thought. Actually, there was the historical school of which was well established in Germany, and they had a battle of methodologies. The historical school said that no, this is nonsense. You can't make a mathematical law about human behavior, and there are no universals. And the scientific school said that no, we have to do mathematics, and we have to quantify, we have to measure the GNP per capita. All of this thing is actually, so the scientific school won because science was very powerful in the eyes of the people. So it had a lot of stature and prestige. So even though human beings cannot be studied using scientific method, because human beings are free. You see, there's a big difference between a human being and a particle. If you look at the sun and you want to calculate a mathematical law for its motion, you can do it. But if you look at a human being, and can I find a mathematical law for your motion? No, because your motion is not determinate. You don't follow a law because you have free will. At this time I can choose whether to do this or whether to do that. And this is what Allah Ta'ala explains to us clearly, that the human being is free. Hadainahu najdain, I have shown him the both ways. And فَمَنْ شَاءَ اتَّخَذَ إِلَىٰ رَبِّهِ سَبِيلًا, whoever wants to, he can take the path to his Lord. So, if I have a person who has done 99 murders, then the regression line says that yes, he will do the 100th murder, but he might become taib, he might do tawbah, and he might become a saint. And similarly, a person who has done good things all his life, he may suddenly stray from the path and do something bad and go in the other direction. So if you are done regressions, I will never find this out. So, in the Methodians, right, economics forgot history, and then they started to formulate laws. And so, according to the theory of international trade that you now study, the laws of economic trade are the same in the 18th century and in the 19th century, in the 20th century, the same for the Mexican and Canada, and the same for India and Pakistan, and same for Afghanistan and Burma. And this is true for laws of gravity. The laws of gravity will be the same in England and in Pakistan. But is it true for trade? If you just think with your minds instead of just blindly obeying the West, you will realize that it cannot be true. And so, are there any universal laws? Well, intuitively it seems clear that there are no universal laws of trade. The trade theory for Pakistan and India will be entirely different from the trade theory for America and Mexico. But according to the textbooks that you are studying, no, they are the same theory. So this is just because these people did not understand what science is about.